Hello, I'm Gloria Hammett from the Romney Centre. It's not very often we actually get to sit down and chat, and today I'm having a bit of a coffee break with Peter Gregory, who's one of the associates at the Romney Centre. So I thought I'd invite you to join the chat. Peter is a psychotherapist. He does all sorts of funky things like EMDR for trauma. He delivers workshops. Got a lot of specialist interests, which I thought would be really interesting. So Peter, you do a lot of dissociative disorder work. Please tell me a bit more about that.
Yes, it's a complex topic. I first became involved with it a couple of years ago because I was a trustee of a charity that helped carers, and we were getting people coming along with complex dissociative disorders, dissociative identity disorder, and there's actually was no help for them on the NHS. So the struggle for the charity was to try to find a clinical pathway to get help for these quite distressed people with complex trauma histories. And we did succeed in doing that for a couple of people. Hard work, but we did it. But that triggered my interest in the whole topic of dissociation. I also started becoming more aware of it in the clients who were coming to see me and how it was presenting. And so I started doing a lot of research, reading, and eventually doing a presentation on the topic, which has proved invaluable in terms of understanding dissociation, complex trauma, and more importantly, really, how to help people get through it, sort of to switch back on, if you like, rather than being switched off, which is a consequence.
Can you tell me more about the sort of treatment plans you offer?
One of the key things is to help people to ground themselves in the present moment. So I sometimes give people something like a stress ball, because they can feel the ball to get them and feel the sensation of the ball, and it gets them to reconnect with what's going on now, rather than wherever their mind has taken them into a different world.
And I know one of the tools we have in common is EMDR. How often do you use that?
I think I'm cautious with EMDR because for people who have had a very, very difficult past, multiple traumas, people have to be strong enough to withstand EMDR. So if people have had a difficult history, I'm very keen on building up their strength by using various techniques to enable them to be able to cope with EMDR. EMDR is what can be really very effective, as you know, and it's interesting that when people are going through EMDR, if it's working, they know it's working as they're going through it, which sounds weird, but it's true.
Just for jargonese breaking, it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it's a trauma protocol. Tell me about the couple work you do, because that's something that I don't do very much of myself.
Okay. Couple work is different in the theory and practice to one-to-one work. Very often, well, the contract is different because as a therapist, you have to make sure you don't take sides, don't collude with what's going on, and don't keep secrets either, because that just upsets the balance of the therapeutic relationship with two people, not just one. The theory is different because one is looking at what's going on between the couple, what is the couple system. So one person does this, the other responds like that, and then the other one does something else, so you get into negative cycles of behaviour.
Quite a fascinating thing to work with, though, I guess.
Yes, it's quite challenging, but very potentially rewarding. And there are also the issue of boundaries in couple therapy. So if it comes out, for instance, that one person has got, maybe they're going through a particularly difficult period of depression, then it might be appropriate they have individual therapy to enable them to better manage and cope with and benefit from couple therapy. So we work with all of those levels all at the same time, really.
And the other really interesting thing that you do that I find fascinating is you give an awful lot of workshops. And I understand that the affairs and infidelity one was recent on your calendar. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I was thinking about a series of 3 workshops linked to couple work. One was the affairs, as I see couples where there's been an affair and they want to sort of work on it and understand that. So I was thinking, okay, let's think about affairs. Then also anger in couples, and what does it mean? How do you manage it? How do you manage even anger when there's angry people in front of you as a therapist? And then trying to find answers to the question, well, is the relationship repairable anyway? And sort of thinking about how therapists can manage that in a couple situation. But the affairs workshop was interesting because in my research, really it highlighted how judgmental the literature is and the language it used for the person who's gone off with somebody else. So the words like betrayed, the betrayer, and so on and so forth. And so it's quite judgmental. And when I did an exercise with the group on the language we used to describe, if I say the victim and the person who'd gone off elsewhere, it was really quite judgmental. Because bearing in mind, us therapists, we come from our own culture as well. And so I was trying to think of other alternative ways of looking what affairs mean.
And it was quite a mixed audience. Who was the workshop actually aimed for?
Because it was aimed at therapists, but it was a therapist from in NHS and a private practice.
Very mixed models,
yes,
I think.
Mixed models, yes.
And how did that work? Did you find that easy to manage or not?
Yes, I did find it easy. Once because I'd done all my work, I had looked at different models of affairs because there's at least 5 or 6 different writers who tried to establish a typology of affair. I think one writer did 18 types, different types. And so
it took a lifetime to get through that.
Well, yes, it did. But in terms of prompting people therapists to think, that's what it did, and it sort of made me think rather more deeply about, well, what does it all mean? What are people doing when all this is going on? So you might be interested, we even got into sort of the Greek idea of duality. You can't have one without the other, the black without the white. You can't have Apollo without Dionysus, chaos without harmony. So, which was interesting.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Let's hope you write the book on it. So the other really interesting workshops that I've heard about but not attended are when you talk about government and whether government is actually getting in the way of mental health. Very topical at the moment, I think.
Yes. What prompted me to sort of put that idea forward was actually, again, most of my workshops are prompted by my client experiences, what people come along with. And this one, again, seeing people coming along with severe disabilities, physical and mental, as well as mental health issues, and in poverty, and their benefits are cut immediately, which then increases suicide risk, increases distress, obviously, for the person involved, sets therapy back months, and as a therapist, I'm left sort of working with trying to carry all that. I also then got asked to write letters of support when the appeal went in. So I investigated, did a letter, and it was my letter that got the benefits reinstated. But it made me rather cross. But I thought, what are these people doing? Because they're not reading the psychiatric report, they're not reading the medical information that the person had. And they're making a decision to basically harm people. And there's no recourse. So I investigated and thought a workshop might be interesting because there's what does mental health mean? What does government policy do to impact on mental health? And you see the IAPT service, for instance, which is very prescriptive, making the client fit for therapy, and limitations in benefits, the benefit system, unemployment system, inequality in the nation anyway, and there's a lot of literature about the effects of that. And I think that it affects therapists at a personal level in terms of how they can develop careers. It affects therapists in terms of, well, how do we as therapists deal with or help the people who come to see us? So I put the workshop together based on those three elements.
And again, a mixed constituency of audience, I guess.
Yes.
You're obviously very passionate about that, and I know that one of your workshops is anger, its meaning and management.
Yes.
So would you like to tell us a little bit more about that? Because I know that you do an awful lot of work with anger management.
Yes, again prompted by experiences in the clinic, consulting room, with people being angry, sometimes towards me, which is a bit worrying sometimes, and you're being threatened because
You're always hurt, aren't you?
Yes, and so again, thinking, what does anger mean in a relationship? Because it can be a way of avoiding intimacy, it can be a way of exercising power over the other. And so my workshop is about how we manage that in clinical terms with the couple to help them communicate more effectively, to allow themselves to be open to listening to the other and responding appropriately. It's also about safety as well, in terms of, so therapist safety, not wanting to get thumped by someone who isn't doing it because they think you're not doing what they want you to do, and probably I'm not. And also helping people to get out of an abusive relationship safely, because that can be scary for people.
Yeah, I mean, I come across a lot of people who stay in relationships because they're scared.
So planning, I've also helped people to do that, to plan an exit route where they're safe to get out without being beaten up. So anger, again, powerful. It's not entirely negative, because if anger is seen as self-defense, where self could be our views of ourselves as well as physically, then an anger is a way of protecting ourselves from being exposed to the grotty bits of ourselves, then that can be understood. But anger could also be good in terms of it can give us the energy to go and do something, because there are organisations that were started through anger, like Amnesty International, for instance, who cross about people being tortured and whatnot. So anger can be quite constructive, and so it's using the energy in a useful way rather than the negative, defensive way, fear-based way that is we often see in couple dynamics.
Lovely, thank you. Well, as you can see, Peter Gregory, a very talented and very flexible psychotherapist with a lot of interest. If you are looking for individual work, one-to-one work, then Peter's here. If you are a couple in problems, anger related or otherwise, Peter's here. But he's also available to give workshops and presentations for counsellors, psychotherapists and other interested professionals.
Yes.
Is there anything about you, apart from the fact that you're a jolly nice man, that I've forgotten to tell these lovely people?
It is interesting. In terms of my presentations, a few years ago I went on a 2-day RADA course called The Voice of Influence, which taught me really how to speak properly, to articulate.
You speak proper like what I do.
Absolutely. And that's transformed my presentations. And I've also used this approach, the approaches I learnt at RADA, in meetings with directors of health and social care, where cases of basically malpractice of one sort or another were being discussed. And this more inclusive type approach was very constructive in opening up the channels for discussion that led to some positive change. So it's a really very, very useful thing. And of course, in therapy, one of the key things is, when people come along, is to create an environment where people feel comfortable enough to talk about really personal things to somebody they don't know at all. So it's really essential, really important, creating that safe space.
And I think you offer a very safe and very interesting space. So, Peter Gregory, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Gloria.